Hello, guys. Another video from me, Stuart, the unrepentant atheist. And today, what we've got is I'm going to be reviewing what I think are some of the best clips from the atheist experience and playing them and then stopping at various points and commenting. And I thought that would be quite interesting because we can see what Christians are trying to do, mainly Christians are trying to do. And I've did a video the other day on burden of proof, and we've got here atheists have faith just like theists. And this guy called in, I can't remember, about 12 years ago or 10 years ago, I'm not too sure, but it's one of my favorite clips. I also find it very irritating because this guy really irritates me as well, but I like the way it ends and I think it's worth watching. So let's just get going, and I'll be pausing now and again.
Hey guys, I've been watching your show for a while off and on, and it just sort of occurred to me that, people who say they believe in God, they're talking about belief. It seems really difficult to prove it, in a conventional sense, one way or another. So how, you guys seem pretty morally certain that there is no God. I mean, it seems to me, ironically, that requires a leap of faith, because how do you know that?
I wouldn't say I'm morally certain.
Well,
and I never claim
more like where you're coming from.
and I never claim absolute certain. You want to address this one real quick, or?
Yeah, so he's called in. He started off by saying that theists or Christians have got belief in God, which is obviously hard to prove, and implying that they wouldn't really try to prove it; they just rely on their faith. But on the other hand, he's saying that atheists are morally certain. I'm not sure what he means by that. I think maybe he should leave out the word morally, but let's just say certain that there is no God. This is a sort of straw man that you often find from Christians. They will define what you are, which I find infuriating. And so let's just see how it's dealt with here.
Well, I mean, I would ask how you're defining God.
Well, I'm not too sure who this guy is. I think I've only seen him on this show, but I think that's an inadequate response. Because we're talking about the principle and the burden of proof, and of course it's relevant in a way to ask. I think he's trying to say, define me a God, and then I'll tell you whether he exists. I'll tell you what my view is. And in a way, I suppose that's quite a good thing to do with Christians. If they say, well, do you believe in God? Then you can say to them, well, which God? Define me your God, and then I'll tell you whether or not I believe in him. But okay, let's see what happens.
And yeah, that's the question I would ask.
I mean, these are good questions,
Well, the thing is that we're not the ones defining a God and claiming that it doesn't exist. We're responding.
That's brilliant. I like Matt had this. I mean, he still does in a way, but he really hit the nail on the head there. Yeah, we're not defining God, but we're not the ones making the claim. Is what he's saying, and
To claims that a God does exist. Now, it's kind of what it sounds like. What you're saying is this argument that it takes more faith to be an atheist than it does to be a theist.
Maybe not more, but maybe just as much.
But it's not. Does it take more faith to disbelieve the claims about Bigfoot than it does to believe them?
Well, that's an interesting point.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, isn't it? It's absolutely the perfect point. This is where when you draw an analogy, like does it take more faith to believe that there are no fairies? And he's got him there, and he just says, "Oh, well, that's an interesting point." And really, he's hit the nail on the head, because for atheists, in principle, there's no difference between. They're all unproved claims. So Bigfoot, the Loch Ness monster, aliens, etc., etc. They're all the same. It's just funny that, I mean, we're not a Bigfootists and we're not a Loch Ness monsterists, but so for me, and I'm sure for Matt, it's all the same, except for the fact that, of course, religion's got this big influence. But he's made a perfect point there that does it take as much faith to believe that Bigfoot doesn't exist as to believe that he does, and he's caught him there.
But, I mean, even with Bigfoot, like, well, okay, I don't want to compare God to Bigfoot.
Not compare God to Bigfoot. There's no evidence that Bigfoot exists, and there's no, I mean, good evidence, because a strict Christian will say, well, there is evidence. There's the martyrs, for example. No, we're talking about good evidence. There's no good evidence that either exists. So in that sense, why not compare God to Bigfoot? Actually, there's more chance that Bigfoot exists because Bigfoot is in a material world. Bigfoot is presumably a biological being. And we know that biological beings exist. And therefore, it's more likely that Bigfoot exists than God exists, because God is a supernatural being. We've got no evidence that supernatural beings exist. So it's actually more outlandish to believe that a God exists than Bigfoot. And yet this guy is saying, oh, don't like to compare God with Bigfoot. Well, I actually think it's quite a favorable comparison for God.
Okay, but in general, faith is, there are a number of ways in which we go about determining what is believable or not to each of us. It's the philosophical field of epistemology. What counts as evidence? What counts as belief? Knowledge is a subset of belief that may in fact be called justified true belief. All of these things are important. But in reality, on a day-to-day basis, what we do is we analyze claims through this heuristic that we've developed. That helps us determine whether or not a claim is likely to be true. We're not making claims about absolute truth. And when I hear claims about the existence of a God, even claims that I used to believe, I now find that there's insufficient evidence to justify those claims. Doesn't mean that I believe that they're absolutely untrue. Some of them I do because they're logically inconsistent.
Are you saying that you believe there's no God, whereas Christians or other religious people believe there's a God?
Well, see, that's the thing. For me, in atheism in general, is a lack of belief in a God. If the question is, do you believe a God exists? If you say yes, you're a theist. Anything else, including I don't know, you're an atheist.
I thought if you said I don't know, that meant agnostic.
No. Agnosticism and atheism aren't mutually exclusive, because agnosticism and Gnosticism go to what you know, and theism and atheism go to what you believe. There are subsets. You could be an agnostic atheist, somebody who doesn't claim to know whether or not there is a God but doesn't believe. Or you could be a Gnostic theist, somebody who doesn't believe that there's a God and they also claim that they know that there's no God.
That's quite a good epistemological explanation by Matt. I think it probably went straight over the guy's head, but I thought that was very good.
Under those definitions, I'm an agnostic atheist. Under a slightly different set of definitions, there's weak atheism and strong atheism. I tend to reject all these because they clutter up the issue. The simplest thing is, I don't believe that any of the claims about the existence of a God have met their burden of proof sufficient to make me believe them. I also, on a side note, and this isn't all atheists, happen to believe that there is in fact no God. And the reason for this, that actually is a position that I would have to justify.
You see, just there, Matt very rarely says that. He's just said that he believes there is no God. He's actually skating on thin ice there, because a sharper Christian would have said, aha, you see? You are saying, you're making a truth claim that there is no God. And he's acknowledged, yes, I think he realizes he probably shouldn't have said that. He's got to justify it now. So let's see how Matt is going to justify in his belief that there is no God, because that goes one step further than just pure lack of belief in a God.
It's not faith-based, because I don't believe it for no reason. I don't believe it.
Well, a lot of Christians will say that their faith is not for no good reason. They would say, a lot of Christians, I've heard say, not just they would say, but I've actually heard them say that they were inspired by the holy texts. So I'm not so sure that faith can really be defined in such a simple black and white terms. It's not belief with absolutely no reason. I think that's a subject for another video.
Without good reason, but I also don't believe it
to justify negative in general, rhetorical terms.
Yes, and that's the thing. I'm not claiming this to an absolute certainty, because I realize that it's not true that you can't prove a negative, but this type of negative would require exhaustive knowledge. But I don't view knowledge that way. Do you believe that there are pixies, for example?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
This is where the guy really starts to irritate me. I think he's starting to sense that he probably wishes he hadn't called. that he came in with a false assumption that. Sorry, guys, just continuing. Yeah, so the chap, this caller came in with a false assumption that atheists are asserting that there is no God. He's been debunked on that. Matt nearly ruined it by saying he believes that there are no gods, but now he's justifying it in the context of everyday belief, and we're going to see what he does. But he's brought up pixies, and this silly fool has said, he said, "Do you believe in pixies?" And the guy's saying, "Oh, I'm not sure." I think he's starting to realize that he's going to be falling into a trap. Of course, he doesn't believe in pixies.
I mean, I
Leprechauns?
no, but I'm not certain of
Do
it.
you believe that leprechauns exist?
I've seen some short Irishmen before.
Yeah, see, there you are. He's prevaricating and he's blocking. He's not prepared to. He's not prepared to have a logical, rational argument, and he knows where Matt is going. I think he's going to admit that in a moment.
I don't know.
Okay.
I think I smell where you're coming from.
Okay. I don't believe that leprechauns exist. And I would, under any conventional day-to-day colloquial definition, say, I know there's no such thing as leprechauns. I'm not claiming to absolutely know for certain that nowhere in the universe, at no time, did a leprechaun actually exist. I'm talking about things in practical terms, in terms that are useful. So it's fair for me, in the context that it's fair for me to say I know there's no such thing as leprechauns, I can say I know there's no such thing as a God. But that kind of knowledge isn't what most religious folks are talking about when they say they know. And because of that, I just simply say I don't happen to have a belief in a God. I don't believe that a God exists.
But see, that's why they call them believers. They're not so much trying to talk about knowledge in a
Right.
practical sense. They're talking about belief, which
Right.
is exactly the same thing.
But they can still be wrong. And the bigger thing isn't just whether or not they can prove their case or whether somebody can disprove it.
See what he did there? He did quite a kind of clever thing because he drew a parallel between the two different types of belief. He's saying that they haven't got knowledge that God exists, and that's the whole point. They've got a belief in the same way that Matt's got a belief that there are no gods. So he's drawing a parallel there with some kind of justification.
Your beliefs inform your actions. I don't mind if somebody, like I said before, I have plenty of friends who have beliefs in gods, and various religions. I don't have a problem with that. Well, I have some small problem because I prefer that people, be able to justify their beliefs with something more than, personal experience or, faith
But
evidence.
maybe that's an unrealistic expectation because
Why? It implies for everything. Name one thing besides religious belief where that would be an unrealistic expectation.
well, I mean, other people don't necessarily have to feel like they want to justify their beliefs, but you do. I don't see why.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is the thing that some other callers have picked up on. Notably, Mark, the troll, or whether he is a troll or not, I don't know. He called into the show several times, and he had an objection, and he said, "Why do you have to come on and make a big show of your atheism?" And that's what this guy is asking. That's what gets up this guy's nose. Why do you have to, you know? A lot of people just keep these things to themselves, and you're making a big deal out of your atheism. Why?
Yes, because I care whether or not my beliefs are true. If you don't care, if you just want to believe what's comfortable and feels good, that's fine. But I happen to care about whether or not my beliefs are true. That's the difference.
Yeah, I like the way he puts that, and he's really if you're he's said this quite a few times that he's not interested in things that make him feel good. He's interested in the truth of the claim, not how useful it is. It's like he's brought up Dumbo, I think, with the rabbit's foot or the feather, which helped him to believe that he could fly. There was no magic property in the feather, but it was like a sort of placebo for Dumbo. And Matt would be more interested in the truth of the proposition: did this feather really, has it got magical properties or not, rather than did it seem to work because you happened to fly when you jumped with it, and in reality it's just a placebo. Now he's interested in truth. A lot of Christians come on and say, well, Christians have done a lot of good things, We've got this great feeling of family with the Christian fellowship, the church, etc., and all these things. But none of that is makes it more or less likely that the proposition is true.
I'm not saying you specifically.
Ascertain that according to what criteria?
According to the criteria that is most useful in determining fact from fantasy, evidence and argument.
Subjective. It all sounds subjective.
No, it's not. It's not simple. I mean, what do you? What's a good example from science? The orbit of Pluto, which Jeff D has used before.
That's a good example.
It takes, 200 and some odd years for Pluto to orbit, but we haven't even known about its existence for that long. So how do we know that it actually orbits? How do we know that it's ever completed a full orbit, or that it ever will? We don't know.
So you can know that,
But we have the math, and we have the science and the evidence that confirms.
Yeah, I was having an exchange with a Christian recently on YouTube. And actually, it wasn't on YouTube. Sorry, no, it was on the Guardian comments. Something came up about religion, and this Christian was saying that. Well, he was accusing me of being a materialist, and also that I only accept that which I only accept that which I can detect with my senses. I will only accept that kind of evidence. And I came back to him and said, no, you misunderstand skepticism and scientific method. I said to him, scientific method does not work on sense data. It works on observations and calculations and predictions. So a lot of Christians say, well, if you can't see it, you don't believe it. Is that right? In other words, you can't see God, so you don't believe in him. So whatever you can't see, you don't believe it. Simple as that. No, that's not how skepticism, and that's not how science works. It's observations, data, calculations, and the whole scientific method. Because you can see the sun in the sky, and it looks like the size of an orange. You'll say, oh, well, the sun's just the size of an orange. But as Matt said, we've got the mathematics, we've got the data, and we've got other ways of working out what is the true state of things.
This former planet is conforming to the laws of gravity, the laws of physics that govern the universe, that are consistently reliable. It's not like science stops working on occasion. There's a reason why there's no documentation for a miracle, because these are violations of natural laws, and they just don't happen. There are things that we may not have a good explanation for right away, but nothing has turned physics on its head.
That's all very interesting, but I don't see the direct equivalency between physics and theology.
You know why? Because one's real and one's not.
I like that. He really he fell into the trap there. He doesn't see the equivalence between physics and theology. I thought that was one's real and one's not. It's perfect.
One involves what we call knowledge, and one involves what we call belief, which aren't exactly the same thing.
Okay. Do you think beliefs matter?
I would hope so.
I mean, if your beliefs inform your actions, wouldn't you want to know, to the best that you possibly could, we can't know everything, that your beliefs are true or likely true? Wouldn't you want to get rid of as many false beliefs as possible?
Not necessarily. I mean,
Isn't that brilliant? I wonder if he'd come back and listen to what he's just said there. Wouldn't you like to get rid of as many false beliefs as possible? Not necessarily. Well, at least he's honest. He wants to hold. He doesn't mind how many false beliefs he holds.
You get to learn about things even if you don't necessarily agree with them.
I didn't say learn about them. I said believe. I can learn about all kinds of religions.
I'm not quite sure what you meant by that.
I spent a great amount of time learning about all kinds of religions. I said beliefs. Wouldn't you want to have as many true beliefs and as few false beliefs as possible?
Ideally, yeah, but how would you know? It seems like a kind of a...
That's the question. That's the question. How do you go about determining whether or not your beliefs are likely to be true or likely to be false?
But see, who are we to assign likelihood to beliefs? It's just
who else could?
Isn't that funny? This is... a lot of Christians come to me and say, who are you to know the workings of the mind of God? Or who are you to who are you? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, this whole point is that there's not enough belief in the abilities of the individual to determine what reality is. Actually, maybe with some justification when I'm listening to this. But um, so anyway, let's just hear what he says.
You don't think that we have any reliable method for distinguishing fact from fantasy?
Nothing that's concrete.
So why do we lock people up?
Yeah, so sorry, just coming back to that, I was just trying to articulate what it was that he was saying about when he said, "Who are we to, decide what is true and what isn't?" And Matt said, "Well, who else could?" I think what he's getting at is that we need this book called the Bible to tell us what's true because we're not smart enough to work it out for ourselves. So that's where he's coming from.
Up in insane asylums?
That's a very good question.
You don't think that there's good justification for that?
In some cases, yeah, and in other cases, no.
If somebody tells you that they were abducted by aliens,
Oh, people tell me that all the time.
you don't think there's any good way to distinguish between whether or not they're giving a real, accurate, factual story, or
I
perhaps
don't believe them, but I can't know for sure.
Well, get rid of this notion of certainty.
People keep coming back to this thing about how can you know anything for sure. And I know where he's coming from. He's trying to say that because we can't be certain about anything, we can have beliefs about anything we want with justification. So we can't be certain about anything at all in the in reality, and that means that all beliefs are equal. Heard this so many times.
Get rid of this notion of absolute certainty. We're talking about practical knowledge. The absolute certainty is a red herring. Oh, I can't know for sure. Well, of course, you can't know anything for sure.
But how can
Does
you
that
know
mean
for
we
sure
don't?
there's no God? How can you know for sure?
No.
He's coming back to where he started off. It's like he hasn't listened to anything that's been said. Oh, can't believe this.
Because I'm not claiming absolute certainty. I'm claiming within the context of reality that is useful, that is a matter of common discussion, that there is insufficient evidence to justify belief for me. And that there is no claim of this absolute certainty or knowledge. I don't claim to know that there is no God anywhere.
Okay, well that's cool because I didn't realize that. I thought that atheists were pretty hand in hand, hardline. There is no God, and we know that.
Well, finally, it's clicked. He was told right at the beginning that atheists don't make the claim there's no God. And then they went through this rigmarole, and Matt very well articulated the whole thing. And he came back and said, "Well, how can you be sure there's no God?" Can you believe it? It's like he hadn't listened to anything at all. He's forgotten the whole conversation. And Matt's just restated it. He says, "Oh, well, okay, fair enough." And,
That for sure.
I happen to believe there is no God, but I don't claim this as an absolute certainty because I think absolute certainty is useless. Now, to the degree that we can know anything, I think it is pretty close to knowledge, at least for me.
But you admit that that's kind of subjective and certainly at least arguable.
Sure, but
well, subjective. And Matt's claim is that he's actually made quite a strong claim there. It's on the verge of strong atheism. He's saying that as close as it can be to knowledge, he thinks that there is no God. That's really, he doesn't really go that far nowadays. And a tougher Christian would have really taken him to task on that. But I think he realizes who he's dealing with here, somebody who can't articulate his arguments or get his thoughts together very well. And so anyway, let's hear how it ends because this is the best of it.
the only thing that's going to change my mind is evidence and reasoned argument, not appeals to emotion, not eyewitness testimonial anecdotal evidence of my grandpa had cancer and we prayed and he got better. Well, so what?
So you're claiming there's a lack of evidence and therefore there's no reason to believe it.
He's got it. It's finally clicked.
Yep.
Well, I got it. How about this? How about I just come down there and punch your fat head in for Jesus?
That's probably one of the best moments in 20 years of the atheist experience. So what do you think happened there? Why do you think that he suddenly flipped like that and got all angry and said, I actually listened very carefully to what he said there. He said, "How about if I just come down and punch in your fat head for teasing me?" He actually says that you've been teasing me. Why? How have they been teasing him? They've just tried to straighten out his misunderstanding. And when he was backed into a corner, and first of all, he realized he was wrong about claiming that atheists have got faith. He realized, even though Matt did give him one or two reasons to actually believe that atheists do have faith, I mean, a strong atheist position. But anyway, so he was debunked on that. He was proven wrong on that. He's also been told, effectively, that he's got no evidence for his beliefs, and that the reason that atheists don't believe is because there's no good evidence. And he's just brilliantly there stated it. The caller just said, "Oh, so atheists, you don't believe because you've got no evidence." And Matt says yes, and then he said, "Well, I'm going to come down and punch you in, punch in your fat head for teasing me."
That was great. I love the fact that you held on, really, for a long time. It was
Yeah,
Hey
Vote.
guys,
I think what Matt means there is that he was raging inside, and he managed to hang on for sort of 12 minutes or 11 minutes of the call. Well, okay, guys, I won't keep you any longer. I've said enough, but I think that is a brilliant call. What do you think? I just love that one. I need to bookmark that. It's one of my favorites. The guy's a little bit irritating, frankly, but I really enjoyed that call, and there were so many issues there, mainly about Christians straw manning atheists with this. So, oh, you're saying there's no God, etc., etc. And Matt really dealt with them very well, I thought there, and actually was quite honest when he says that he's, in the context that we don't believe that we know there are no such things as leprechauns. We also know there are no such things as gods, and I think he's on slightly tricky ground there. I think that's for another episode, because I always say I lack a belief in God. I never get into, well, I believe there are no gods, because then rather than discussing all the evidence for God, you end up trying to justify that there are no gods, and you get absolutely nowhere. It's pointless to do that. So, well, that's all for now, and I hope you enjoyed that. And I'll be back. I'll be back soon with another video. So, see you for now.